Hello, everybody. So we've been working this week a lot with discussion. We've been practicing like proper format, proper language, vocabulary associated with discussion. How do we approach it professionally and academically? And most importantly, like how do we approach, two opposing opinions respectfully and come to a joint conclusion? And everyone's been really great, with learning all those different steps and building up to what our summative assessment will be in the upcoming days. But I really wanted to focus on this kind of like put it all together aspect as we're now towards this end of the unit, and we're really just trying to like put the finishing touches on what we've learned throughout the week, because you guys have all the pieces and you've put them all together. We're just gonna polish it up so that when you do go into that summative presidential style debate, you guys will feel really confident and really prepared for that. So I want to just touch for a second on what we did yesterday. It's going to kind of segue into what I want to talk about right now. So we focused on that WebQuest activity with the Smith family, where you had to like read the room in a sense, figuring out what was important to the Smiths. So when giving your debate, you knew what points to touch on, and like, let's say you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, you want to go with your most important and then rank them that way, but you need to know what's most important to the Smiths and who the Smiths are, what the Smiths are about, so that you can appropriately like enter with your hardest hitting point and what's, because for example, they're looking for a car. If you're gonna tell me like, oh, this car is super great for off-roading, but the Smiths don't off-road, like that's not a point that matters to me, so it's gonna be like null and void in the discussion. You kind of just like wasted a turn almost there. And so that's kind of like reading your audience going into the discussion. But I also want to talk about how important it is to continue reading your audience while you are like participating in the discussion, because the goal is ultimately you're gonna come to a conclusion, right? So at some point somebody needs to waver and somebody has to have that light bulb go off that's like, oh, you know what, that was like a really valid point that you just made. I'm going to think about that, and I'm going to go ahead and make, a little bit of a mental change there and start to think about that. But you have to really know when to push and know when to hold back. So it's a really fine line, because people who have we all have opinions, but when you think of an opinion, that's something that's important to you, or a thought that something you think is true, you're holding that tightly. So the chances that someone's going to change their mind it's slim, so if you're pushing someone to that kind of line right there, and they're teetering on that, you've got them all the way to where they're teetering on that line where they're like, oh, that kind of makes sense, I'm gonna jump on board with you. You need to pull the reins back for a second, If I'm like, oh, that point makes a lot of sense, I kind of like that, and then you hit me with back to back to back to back fact, after that, I'm gonna feel overwhelmed. I'm not gonna wanna participate in your discussion anymore. I'm gonna put up a wall, and I don't hear you because I feel like you're attacking me in the discussion, So it's important that you realize that you need to take a moment to be like, oh, I can kind of see, like, they're pausing more, they're thinking a little bit more, it's taking them a little bit longer to respond, they're looking around. That's like that's body language, and that's things that are signaling to you that like this person is thinking, like the wheels are turning up there. So you want to give them a second to be like, oh, okay, because if you at that point push too hard, the chances that they're going to get defensive increase, and now everything you're saying, doesn't really have any weight to them anymore, because all they're doing is defending their point, and they're going to really like white knuckle onto their original stance, and like that's not what you want to do. A little segue from that as well, we're talking about processing time here, so if I say something, you need to give, I need to give you a couple seconds to think about it. It's not effective if I say, X, Y, Z, move on to 1, 2, 3. When did I get to think about XYZ? Because now I'm on 1, 2, 3. XYZ could have been that point that like did it for me and switched me, had me on that teetering line and sent me over. But like you said something else right after. I'm not getting that chance to be like, let me process and hear what you really said and move on from that. So, because it's kind of for two things. One, like I said, you don't want to invalidate the first point that you made by saying something right after it. And now I don't remember the first point. You want to give it, equal processing time, because that could be the point that like sends you over the edge. Or sometimes things work in conjunction, but you still regardless need to practice. So they're like, oh, I understand point one. I'm not really ready to jump ship yet onto your side. Now that you've said point two, I kind of see how that works with point one. Now I'm ready to jump ship onto your side. But if you hadn't have given me that second to process that first XYZ before adding 1, 2, 3 onto it, I wouldn't have been able to put that connection together. Everyone doesn't process things just the same way that you do. So give everyone an appropriate, respectful amount of time to sit with, what you've said and figure out how they want to make that work in their head, and then move on. That's why I've really been reinforcing proper discussion format, where it's, you say something, I'm going to respond. Think about it, you'll respond. Like, I don't want to see anybody, in any of these activities being like, and another thing, like, we want to avoid that moment that you have right there. We don't want to be adding on and adding on and adding on to where like, I'm either going to 1, get defensive, 2, can't process, 3, couldn't even possibly hear what you said. That's why I really, really want to make sure that we're following that proper we're following the proper format. We're allowing for appropriate processing time, and that we're really like reading our audience and being like, oh, this isn't working right now. I'm going to switch gears, or, oh, I really see that they like hooked onto that point. I'm going to continue to go down that path because like, they really looked like they registered with that. They didn't immediately refute my claim. They asked a follow-up question, that's kind of signaling to me like, oh, they didn't immediately like go, no, I don't like that. Here's an argument against it. They asked a question. I'm going to stick with that kind of, go down that path of thought when I'm giving my points because it registered with them. So it's really important that you keep reading the room, keep reading your audience. Don't think that doing that initial, I know what they're about, is going to be enough for you to really like hone in and get your point across and get their opinion changed. So I just want to make sure that everybody's thinking about that. We'll go over it a little bit more in class today, but I just want to make sure that everyone kind of knows where we're going and thinks about that before we go into our 2 different discussion-based activities for the day.